They said he had nothing. No land, no cattle, no name worth speaking in the daylight. They called him the poorest man in Silver Hollow, a mountain drifter with holes in his boots and dust in his hair. And when Eliza Hart, the banker's only daughter, stood at that crooked wooden altar and said, "I do," the whole town gasped like someone had died. Her father turned his back. Her mother wept into a lace handkerchief. The preacher forgot the last line of the vow. And somewhere in the back of that little church, a man in a black coat smiled, because he knew something no one else did. He knew the mountain man wasn't poor at all. He knew what waited above the clouds. Before we go any further, friend, tell me, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your town, your country, your little corner of the map in the comments. Sending love your way wherever you are. Now settle in, because this one is going to stay with you. Because 3 days after that wedding, Eliza Hart followed her ragged husband up a trail no map had ever drawn. And what she found waiting above the clouds would rewrite everything she thought she knew about love, about gold, and about the man she had just promised her life to. The wind was wrong that morning. That was the first thing old Martha Cobb said as she pinned the last white flower into Eliza Hart's dark hair. The wind in Silver Hollow always came from the west, dry and lazy, carrying the smell of sage and cattle. But that morning, on the day of the wedding, it blew from the north, cold, sharp, and smelling of pine and something else. Something metallic. Something like snow, though it was only the tail end of summer. Eliza stood in front of the cracked mirror in her father's parlor and looked at herself as if she were meeting a stranger. Her dress was not white. Her mother had refused. It was a pale gray, the color of ash after a fire, and it hung on her thin shoulders like a warning. "You still have time, Eliza," her mother whispered from the doorway. "Your father will forgive you. Just say the word." Eliza did not turn around. "His name is Caleb," she said quietly. "You've never once used it." Downstairs, the grandfather clock struck 10. Somewhere across town, at the little wooden church on the edge of the desert, the bell began to ring. Slow, uneven, like the bell ringer himself did not want to pull the rope. Silver Hollow was a town built on silver, then abandoned by it. When the mines dried up in 1861, most folks left. Only the stubborn ones stayed, the ranchers, the banker, the saloon keeper, the widow who ran the general store. And the mountain people, the ones who lived up in the high country, who came down once a month with furs and firewood, who spoke little and stared long. Caleb Ray was one of them. He had walked into town 4 years earlier with nothing but a rifle, a mule, and a scar that ran from his left ear down into the collar of his shirt. He never told anyone where he came from. He never told anyone where he went when he disappeared for weeks at a time. He paid for his flour and his salt with strange, dull coins that the storekeeper accepted only because Caleb never argued about the price. And then, one spring afternoon, he had looked up from the counter of the general store, and he had seen Eliza Hart reading a book by the window. That was all it took. For him, for her, for the whole ruined story that was about to begin. Eliza walked to the church alone. Her father would not give her away. Her mother stayed home and drew the curtains. The few townspeople who came stood at the back of the church with their arms crossed, whispering behind their hands. The banker's daughter, marrying a mountain drifter. The prettiest girl in 3 counties, throwing herself away on a man who owned nothing but the clothes on his back. Caleb was already at the altar when she stepped through the door. He had tried. Lord, he had tried. His boots were brushed, though the soles were still worn through. His shirt was clean, though the cuffs were frayed. He had shaved, and the scar on his neck looked pink and raw in the dim church light. When he saw her walk down the aisle in that gray dress, his eyes filled with something that was not quite tears and not quite pride. It was closer to fear. The preacher rushed the vows. He skipped 2 lines and mumbled a third. And when he asked if anyone objected, the whole church held its breath, because everyone expected the banker himself to burst through the doors with a shotgun. But Elias Hart did not come. Instead, in the very back row, a tall man in a long black coat leaned against the wall. Eliza had never seen him before. He had a silver-tipped cane and a face like polished bone. And when the preacher said, "You may kiss the bride," the man in the black coat smiled, a slow, patient smile, and quietly slipped out the door. Caleb saw him. Eliza felt her husband's hand tighten around hers, hard enough to hurt. "Who was that?" she whispered as they walked back down the aisle. Caleb did not answer. His jaw was set like stone. His eyes were fixed on the church door as if he expected the man to walk back through it with a gun. Outside, the wind had shifted again. It was blowing from the north now, harder than before, carrying with it the first cold breath of a season that should not have arrived for weeks. "Caleb," Eliza said again. "Who was he?" Her husband finally looked down at her, and for the first time since she had known him, she saw something in his eyes that terrified her. "We have to leave Silver Hollow," he said. Tonight. They did not leave that night. Caleb had wanted to. He had stood in the doorway of the little rented room above the saloon, staring out at the dark street, one hand on his rifle and one hand on the small leather bag that held everything Eliza owned in the world. But she had begged him to wait, just one night, just long enough to say goodbye to her mother, just long enough to pretend, for a few hours, that this was a normal wedding and she was a normal bride. Caleb had closed the door. He had not slept. He sat on the wooden chair by the window all night, the rifle across his lap, watching the street below. Eliza lay in the narrow bed with her eyes open, listening to the boards creak beneath her husband's boots as he shifted his weight. She did not ask him again about the man in the black coat. Something in the way Caleb's hands trembled when he loaded the rifle told her the answer was worse than the question. At dawn, the knock came. 3 sharp raps on the door. Polite, patient. The knock of a man who knew he would be answered. Caleb was on his feet before the 3rd knock finished. He motioned Eliza to stay in the bed, to pull the blanket over her head, to be silent. Then he cocked the rifle and cracked the door open 2 inches. "Mr. Ray," said a smooth voice from the hallway, "I believe we have unfinished business." Eliza held her breath. "I have no business with you," Caleb said. His voice was flat, dangerous. "Ah, but you do." The man in the black coat chuckled, low and pleased. "You have my map, Mr. Ray, and I have come a very long way to retrieve it." Eliza felt her stomach turn to ice. A map? What map? She thought of her husband's mule, of the strange dull coins he paid the storekeeper with, of the weeks he disappeared into the mountains without explanation. She thought of the scar on his neck, and how he had never once told her where it came from. "There is no map," Caleb said. "There never was." "Then perhaps," the voice said gently, "your lovely new wife would like to explain why her father sold you to me last week for the price of his debts." The floor seemed to drop out from under Eliza. Caleb did not move. He did not breathe. Eliza sat up slowly in the bed, the blanket falling from her shoulders, and stared at the door as if she could see through it. "What did you say?" she whispered. "Ah." The man in the black coat sounded pleased. "She's awake. Good morning, Mrs. Ray. My name is Silas Crane. Your father owes me a great deal of money, more than his little bank can ever repay. Last Tuesday he offered me something in trade. Your husband's secret, and your husband's life." Eliza's hands went numb. "Get out," Caleb said. "I will," Silas Crane said. "For now. But you have 3 days, Mr. Ray. 3 days to bring me what I am owed. If you run, and I know you will try, I will find you. I always find them. Ask the men whose bones are bleaching in the Sonoran sun. Ask the woman I left in the ravine outside Tucson." He paused. "Or better yet, do not ask. Just be reasonable." Footsteps. Slow. Unhurried. Down the hallway. Down the stairs. Gone. Caleb closed the door and pressed his forehead against the wood. His shoulders shook once, hard, and then went still. Eliza climbed out of the bed. Her bare feet were cold on the plank floor. She walked to him and put her hand on his back. "Caleb, look at me." He turned. His face was gray. "What map?" she asked. He said nothing. "Caleb, my father sold you to that man. I need to know what for." He looked at her for a long moment. And then, slowly, he reached inside his shirt and pulled out a small folded square of leather. It was old. So old the edges were cracked and the surface was dark with age and oil. He set it on the little table by the window and unfolded it carefully. It was not a map exactly. It was a drawing of a mountain, with a strange curved shape at the top that did not look like any peak Eliza had ever seen. Around the shape were symbols, not English, not Spanish, not any language she recognized. And in the very center of the drawing, someone had made a small, careful mark in red ink. "What is that place?" she whispered. Caleb's voice was hoarse. "My father called it the kingdom in the clouds," he said. "And it is not on any map in this world. Because the men who found it made sure of that. They killed everyone who ever saw it. Everyone except me." He looked up at her. His eyes were wet now. "And in 3 days, Eliza, Silas Crane is going to kill us both. Unless we get there first." Outside, the north wind picked up again, and somewhere in the distance, a horse screamed. They rode out of Silver Hollow before the sun rose. Caleb had 2 horses waiting at the edge of town. A lean gray mare for Eliza and a scarred bay gelding for himself. He had bought them months ago, quietly, from an old Apache trader who lived down by the river. Fast horses. Mountain horses. Horses that could climb where other horses could not. Eliza wore men's clothes now. A rough wool shirt, canvas trousers, boots that were too big and stuffed with rags at the toe. Her hair was pinned up under a wide, flat-brimmed hat. She looked, in the dim gray light before dawn, like a slim, frightened boy. Caleb had said almost nothing since the encounter at the door. He worked with quick, silent hands, packing saddlebags, checking the rifle, tightening the cinches. Every few seconds he glanced down the empty street. Every few seconds he listened. "He's not coming yet," Eliza said finally. "He's already come," Caleb said. "He's watching us right now. From somewhere. He wants us to run." "Then why?" "Because if we stayed, he'd take the map anyway. And then he'd have no reason to keep us alive." Caleb tightened a strap so hard the horse grunted. "This way we have 3 days. This way we have a chance." They rode north. The trail out of Silver Hollow ran through low desert for the first hour. Flat, dry, endless. The sage was silver in the dawn light. Coyotes called from the arroyos. A single hawk hung above them, motionless in the pale sky. Eliza had never been this far north of town. Her father had forbidden it. He had said the country was full of bandits and worse. Now she understood he had been afraid of something else entirely. By mid-morning the desert began to rise. Low hills at first, then higher, harder, redder hills. And beyond the hills, growing slowly on the horizon like the shape of something waking up, the mountains. Eliza had seen the mountains all her life. From the porch of her father's house, they had been a distant blue wall, the edge of the world. Now, as they rode closer, they became something else. They became huge. They became jagged. They became a place where a person could disappear and never come back. Caleb led them off the main trail around noon. There was no trail where he turned. Just sagebrush and rock. But he rode without hesitation, weaving between boulders, following signs Eliza could not see. A bent twig here, a scratched stone there, a pile of 3 small pebbles balanced on a 4th. "My father made these marks," Caleb said quietly, without looking back. "When I was a boy, he walked this trail with me twice a year, every year from the time I could sit a horse. He told me one day I would need to remember." "Your father knew about the kingdom?" "My father built the last road to it," Caleb said. "He was the last man alive who knew the way, until they killed him." He did not say who they were. He did not have to. They rode until the sun was low. Then Caleb slid off his horse in the shadow of a red cliff and motioned for Eliza to do the same. There was a spring here, hidden behind a curtain of cottonwood roots. A tiny pool of clear cold water in a rock basin. The horses drank greedily. Eliza knelt and cupped water in her hands and drank until her teeth ached. "How much farther?" she asked. 3 more days, Caleb said. "If the weather holds." And if it doesn't? He looked up at the sky. The north wind was still blowing. Higher up, at the top of the mountain wall, Eliza could see thin white streamers of cloud moving fast. Faster than clouds should move. If it doesn't, Caleb said quietly, then Silas Crane will not need to kill us. The mountain will do it for him. That night they camped in a shallow cave in the red rock. Caleb would not let her build a fire. They ate cold biscuits and dried beef, and they wrapped themselves in wool blankets and lay close together for warmth. The stars above the cave mouth were harder and brighter than any stars Eliza had ever seen. "Caleb," she whispered, when she was sure he was still awake, "tell me, what is up there? What did your father find?" He was quiet for a long time. "A city," he said at last. "A city of stone, built into the side of the mountain, above the clouds. Older than the Apache. Older than the Spanish. Older, my father said, than the people who told the stories about it. The men who lived there worked a metal we have no name for. Softer than gold, brighter than silver, and worth more than either." He paused. "But it wasn't the metal that killed my father, Eliza. It was what guarded it." She waited. "Go to sleep," he said. "You'll see for yourself soon enough." She did not sleep. She lay with her eyes open, watching the stars, listening to the wind, and somewhere far away, on the trail behind them, she thought she heard a horse. Slow, patient, unhurried. The horse of a man who always found what he was looking for. They climbed for 2 more days. The trail, if it could be called a trail, became narrower and steeper with every mile. By the end of the 2nd day, the horses could go no farther. Caleb tied them in a sheltered grove of pines and hobbled them loosely. He fed them the last of the oats, patted the gray mare's neck for a long time, and then turned his back and did not look at them again. "Will they be all right?" Eliza asked. "They'll be all right," Caleb said. He did not add the words, "but we might not." He did not have to. They went on by foot. The pine trees thinned. Then they disappeared. There was only rock now. Great slabs of dark stone, cracked and folded like the pages of an ancient book. The air grew thinner. Eliza's chest ached with every breath. Her legs shook. Her fingers went numb and then burned and then went numb again. And still they climbed. On the 3rd day, the clouds came down to meet them. It was strange, Eliza thought later, how the clouds moved. They did not roll like the storm clouds she had watched from her father's porch. They crept. They flowed like slow water up the ridges and along the cliffs. And when Caleb stepped into them, he simply vanished. One moment his broad back was 10 feet ahead of her, and the next moment there was only white. "Caleb!" she cried. His hand closed around hers. "Don't let go," he said, and his voice was strange and close and muffled by the fog. "Whatever you see, whatever you hear, do not let go of my hand." They walked into the cloud. Eliza could not see her own boots. She could barely see Caleb's arm where it stretched out to hold her. The world became a soft, cold, gray nothing. Somewhere far away, water was dripping. Somewhere closer, a rock fell. A small clatter, then silence. She heard, or thought she heard, the sound of voices. Whispers. Not English. Not any language. She squeezed her husband's hand harder. And then, without warning, the cloud broke. They stepped out of the mist onto a wide, flat shelf of stone. And Eliza stopped so suddenly that Caleb almost pulled her over. The kingdom in the clouds lay in front of her. It was a city. A ruined city, carved directly into the face of a vast curved mountain wall. Terraces stepped down from a great height, one below the other, each edged with pale stone. Buildings, square, low, with dark empty windows, stood in careful rows along the terraces. Stairways of white stone climbed between them. In the very center of the highest terrace stood a single tall tower, its top broken off, its sides carved with symbols like the ones on Caleb's leather map. And everything was silent. There were no birds, no wind, no sound at all except the beat of Eliza's own heart in her ears. "Oh God," she whispered. "Do not say his name here," Caleb said quietly. "Not out loud. Not until we are gone." They walked into the city. It was old. so old that the carvings on the buildings had been softened by centuries of wind and rain, until the shapes were nothing but suggestions. There were no bodies, no bones. Whoever had lived here had left long ago or had been taken. Eliza could not tell which. Doors stood open on empty rooms. In one house, a small clay bowl sat on a stone table, as if someone had set it down for a moment and never come back. "Where is everyone?" she whispered. "Gone," Caleb said. "Long before my father found this place. Long before the Spanish. Long before the first Apache set foot in these mountains." He looked around, and his voice grew quieter still. "My father used to say they didn't leave. He said something took them." Eliza felt the hair on the back of her neck lift. "Took them where?" Caleb did not answer. He was walking toward the center of the city, toward the broken tower. Eliza hurried to keep up. At the base of the tower, set into the white stone, was a doorway. It was low. Caleb had to duck his head to enter. Inside, a single narrow staircase spiraled downward into the dark. Cold air breathed up from it. It smelled of old water and something else. Something faintly metallic. Something almost sweet. Caleb struck a match and lit a small candle from his pack. "Down there," he said. "That is what my father died for. That is what Silas Crane wants." He looked at her, his face pale in the candlelight. "Eliza, you can stay here. You do not have to see this." She thought about it. For one long, sharp moment, she thought about it. Then she took his hand. "I did not marry you to stand at the door," she said. "Show me." They went down. The stairs went down further than any stairs should. The candle flame guttered but did not go out. The walls were smooth, polished, cold. Symbols were carved into them at regular intervals, the same symbols as on the map, the same symbols as on the tower above. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a chamber. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. The chamber was small, round, and every inch of it, the floor, the walls, the low ceiling, was covered in the metal Caleb had spoken of. Not gold, not silver, something in between and yet neither. It glowed faintly in the candlelight, as if it held its own soft light within it. In the center of the chamber, on a low stone pedestal, sat a single object. It was a crown of the same soft, glowing metal, set with small dark stones that seemed to swallow the candlelight rather than reflect it. And around the pedestal, arranged in a careful circle, were 7 human skulls. Eliza staggered back. Caleb caught her arm. Behind them, from the top of the stairs, a soft, unhurried voice called down through the dark. "Mr. Ray," said Silas Crane. "How very kind of you to open the door for me." Caleb turned slowly. The candle in his hand did not shake. Eliza would remember that later, how steady her husband's hand was, in the moment he understood he was going to die. Silas Crane came down the stairs one at a time. He did not hurry. He never hurried. The silver tip of his cane clicked against each stone step. Tock, tock, tock. Like a clock counting down the last minutes of 2 lives. Behind him came 2 men. Big men. Men with rifles across their backs and pistols on their hips and faces that had forgotten how to smile a long time ago. "You were followed from the moment you left Silver Hollow," Silas said kindly, as he stepped into the little glowing chamber. "You know that, of course. You are not a stupid man. You simply hoped I would be stupid." He looked around the chamber slowly, and for the first time his smooth, pale face changed. His mouth opened slightly. His eyes went wide, and something almost like reverence crossed his features. "My God," he whispered. "My God, it is real." "Do not say his name here," Caleb said softly. Silas did not seem to hear. He walked past Caleb as if Caleb were a piece of furniture. He walked past Eliza as if she were a shadow. He walked to the pedestal in the center of the chamber, and he stood in front of the crown, and he stared at it the way a starving man stares at bread. 20 years, he whispered. 20 years I have hunted this. 20 years I have paid men, killed men, ruined men, waiting for one of them to lead me here. He turned his head slightly, and his eyes found Caleb's. Your father was the closest. He almost took it to his grave. But not quite. He smiled. Not quite. Caleb's jaw tightened. You killed him. I bought him, Silas corrected gently. Just as I bought your father-in-law. Just as I would have bought you, if you were the sort of man who could be bought. He shrugged. Since you are not, I will simply take the crown and then I will take your lives. It is nothing personal, Mr. Ray. It is only business. One of the big men behind him raised his rifle. Eliza did not think. She did not plan. She did not even breathe. Her hand went into the pocket of Caleb's coat, where she had seen him slip the small pistol that morning, and she pulled it out and she pointed it at Silas Crane and she pulled the trigger. The shot in that small stone chamber was like the end of the world. The bullet took Silas Crane high in the shoulder. He staggered, gasped, and fell to one knee. The two men behind him swung their rifles up, but Caleb had already moved. He hurled the candle at the first man's face. He drew his own pistol as the man dropped his rifle and clawed at the hot wax. He fired twice. The first man went down. The second man fired back. The shot went wild, ringing off the stone ceiling. And then Caleb fired again and the second man dropped his rifle and slid slowly down the wall, leaving a dark streak behind him. The chamber was dark now, except for the soft, terrible glow of the strange metal walls. Silas Crane was still alive. He was on his knees on the floor, one hand pressed to his shoulder, the other still gripping the silver-tipped cane. Blood was running between his fingers, dark and slow. He looked up at Eliza and he laughed. Actually laughed. A soft, wet, disbelieving laugh. The banker's daughter, he said. The banker's daughter. Well, I did not see that coming. Get up, Caleb said. His voice was low and cold. Get up and walk out of this mountain. Take your dead men with you. If I see you again, I will not miss. Silas looked at him. Then he looked at the crown on the pedestal, and something flickered in his eyes. Something desperate. Something that had nothing to do with money anymore. You do not understand, he whispered. You have never understood, Mr. Ray. This is not gold. This is not silver. This is older than gold. Do you know what a man could do with a crown like that? Do you know who would kneel? Do you know who would pay? Get out, Caleb said. Silas Crane did not get out. Instead, with a speed that seemed impossible for a wounded man, he lunged. Not at Caleb. Not at Eliza. At the pedestal. His pale, bloody hand closed around the crown of glowing metal, and he snatched it up, and he held it high above his head like a prize. Mine! He screamed. Mine! And then he stopped screaming. Eliza would try, for the rest of her life, to describe what happened next. She never could. There was no light. There was no sound. There was only a feeling. A sudden, terrible feeling, as if something enormous and very old had turned its head and looked directly at Silas Crane. The crown, in his hand, was no longer glowing softly. It was glowing brightly. Brighter. Brighter. The dark stones set into it were not dark anymore. They were pulling the light out of the chamber, out of the walls, out of the candles that lay burning on the floor. The room grew colder. Eliza's breath came out in white clouds. Silas Crane's eyes rolled back in his head. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. And then, very quietly, without any noise at all, Silas Crane began to fold. His body seemed to grow thinner. His shoulders drew in. His face grew longer, then narrower, then wrong. His skin turned the color of ash. His clothes hung loose. And then, in the space of a single held breath, there was nothing left of Silas Crane but a heap of black cloth on the stone floor, and, sitting neatly on top of the cloth, one more human skull. The crown clattered onto the pedestal, glowing softly again. 8 skulls now in the careful circle, not 7. Caleb grabbed Eliza's wrist so hard she cried out. We are leaving, he said. We are leaving now. They ran. Up the stairs. Through the tower. Across the silent terraces of the ghost city. Into the cloud, into the fog. Into the cold and the wet and the roar of a wind that had not been there before. Somewhere above them, in the empty city, something began to hum. It was not a voice. It was not a bell. It was the sound the crown had made when Silas Crane held it up, only louder now. Much louder. And behind them, in the little chamber deep beneath the tower, the eighth skull turned slowly on its pile of black cloth, as if it were watching them go. They did not stop running until the clouds were behind them. By then Eliza's lungs were on fire. Her legs no longer belonged to her. She fell twice on the loose scree of the upper trail, and both times Caleb hauled her back to her feet without a word, without slowing. The humming from the city followed them for the first mile. Then it faded. Then it was gone. But the memory of it stayed inside Eliza's chest like a second heartbeat, a slow, wrong drumming that she could not shake loose. They found the horses where they had left them. The gray mare shied when Eliza reached for the reins. The bay gelding rolled his eyes and stamped. They could smell it on her, she realized. Whatever she had walked through, whatever had brushed against her in that chamber, the animals could smell it and they did not like it. Caleb spoke to the horses in a low, calm voice. He stroked their necks. He fed them the last of the sugar from his pack. Slowly, slowly, they let him tighten the cinches. "Ride," he said. They rode. Down through the pine grove. Down through the red rock. Down through the sagebrush and the arroyos and the silver desert. They did not speak. They barely stopped. When the horses could go no further, they walked beside them, leading them by the bridle. When the horses could walk again, they mounted and rode. 3 days up, 1.5 days down. Because fear, Eliza would learn, is faster than hope. They came into Silver Hollow at dusk on the 5th day. The town was quiet. Too quiet. The saloon was closed. The general store was shuttered. In the window of the little wooden church, a single lamp burned. Eliza rode down the main street with her head bowed, half expecting a bullet, half expecting a mob. Neither came. They stopped in front of her father's house. Eliza slid down from the gray mare. Her legs almost gave out beneath her. Caleb caught her elbow, steadied her, and then let her go, because he understood, without being told, that this was something she had to do alone. She walked up the porch. She knocked on the door. Her mother opened it. Martha Hart's face was thinner than Eliza remembered. Her eyes were red. Her lace collar was crooked. When she saw her daughter standing there in a man's clothes, with dirt on her face and blood on her sleeve, she did not scream. She did not weep. She did not ask where Eliza had been. She simply said very quietly, "Your father is dead, Eliza. He hanged himself in the bank the night after the wedding." Eliza did not answer. She could not. There were no words left in her. Behind her mother, in the dim parlor, the grandfather clock ticked. The same slow, patient tick it had ticked her whole life. She thought of Silas Crane's cane on the stone stairs. Tock, tock, tock. She thought of the skulls in a careful circle. She thought of 8 now where there had been 7. She reached out and she took her mother's hand. "Come with us," she said. Her mother stared at her. "Come with us. Away from here. Away from this town and this house and this street where every window watched us. Come with us, Mother. There is nothing left for you here." Martha Hart looked past her, at the mountain man standing in the street with 2 tired horses and a rifle across his back. She looked at his worn boots, at his patched shirt, at the scar on his neck. She looked at him for a long time, and then slowly she nodded. They left Silver Hollow at first light. 3 horses now. 3 riders. A small wooden trunk lashed to the back of the mare, holding a few dresses and a wedding ring and a locket with Elias Hart's picture inside. Nothing else. Nothing else was worth carrying. They rode east. Not back toward the mountains. Never back toward the mountains. East, toward the plains, toward the wide flat country where a person could see a stranger coming from a full day's ride away. Toward a town none of them had ever heard of, where none of them was known, where a woman in a gray dress could become a woman in a blue dress and start over. Caleb still had the leather map. He carried it in his shirt, against his heart, the way another man might carry a photograph or a lock of hair. Eliza never asked him what he intended to do with it. She did not need to. She had seen his face in the chamber. She had seen him look at the crown and turn away. Some men, she understood, are ruined by the sight of gold. and some men are set free by it. Caleb Ray was the second kind. On their third night on the plains, they camped by a slow brown river. Caleb built a fire, a small one because old habits do not die, and Eliza wrapped her mother in a blanket and made her drink hot coffee from a tin cup. The stars came out. The frogs sang. Somewhere far off, a coyote howled, and another coyote answered. Caleb sat down beside Eliza and put his arm around her shoulders. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. She did not have to ask what he meant. "No," she said. "You could have married any man in 3 counties. I know. You would have had a fine house, fine dresses, fine dinners. I know." She looked up at him. His face, in the firelight, was younger than it had been in the church, and older too. Both at once, the way a face is after a long, hard journey. "I married the poorest man in Silver Hollow, Caleb Ray," she said, "and he showed me a kingdom in the clouds." What woman in 3 counties could say that? He smiled, the first real smile she had ever seen on him, and he kissed the top of her head, and he did not answer. Across the fire, Martha Hart watched them, and for the first time since the wedding, since the shame, since the awful gray day in the crooked little church, Martha Hart smiled too. They say, in the old towns of the high country, that if you ride far enough north of where Silver Hollow used to be, because Silver Hollow is gone now, blown away by wind and time and the slow forgetting of the world, you can still see the mountain where the clouds do not lift. They say the trail up to it has vanished. That the marks Caleb Ray's father made, the bent twigs, the balanced pebbles, have been swallowed by sage and stone. That no man alive knows the way now. But sometimes, they say, on a still night when the north wind is quiet, a hum comes down from the high country. A soft, wrong, patient hum, and the cattle grow restless in their pastures. And the dogs in the far ranch houses turn their faces toward the mountains and will not eat. And the old men lift their coffee cups and say quietly, "She is still up there, the crown, the 8 skulls in a circle, waiting for the 9th. Caleb and Eliza Ray lived out their days in a small town in the east. A town on the plains, where the sky was wide and the mountains were only a rumor. They had 3 children. They ran a small farm. They loved each other quietly and stubbornly for 41 years. When Caleb died in his sleep in the winter of 1898, Eliza folded the old leather map into his hands and buried him with it. She never spoke of the kingdom in the clouds. Not to her children. Not to her grandchildren. Not to the young journalist from Kansas City who came knocking one summer, chasing an old story he had heard from a drunken cowhand in Amarillo. She only smiled and said, "My husband was the poorest man in Silver Hollow, and the richest man I ever knew." And then she closed the door. So tell me, friend, now that you have walked that mountain with them, now that you have seen the crown and the skulls and the man in the black coat fold into ash on a stone floor, tell me one thing before you go. If you had been Eliza Hart, standing in that little chamber above the clouds, with the glowing crown on the pedestal and the 8 skulls in a circle at your feet, would you have walked away empty-handed like she did? Or would you have reached for it? Think carefully. Tell me in the comments below. I read every one. And wherever you are watching from tonight, from a small town, from a big city, from a quiet room where the light is low and the coffee has gone cold, thank you. Thank you for riding this trail with me. Sleep well tonight, and if the wind blows from the north, do not answer it.